Good evening and welcome to the Maison Française. I'm Pierre, I'm director of the Maison Française, and we're very happy to be welcoming Muriel Darmon this evening. And the talk is co-sponsored with the Department of Sociology. Muriel Darmon is a sociologist and a CNRS research fellow at the Centre Max Weber at the Ecole Normale Supérieure de Lyon. She received her doctorate in sociology from the Sorbonne, Université Paris 5, and has also spent a number of years in American universities, including at the Institute of French Studies at NYU, where I first met her. And her prime area of interest and specialization is the sociological study of socialization processes, and more specifically the study of cases of individual transformation through socialization, whether from total conversion to very minute changes. Her research examines how people change, what makes them change, and what they change into. Muriel's first book, coming out of her dissertation, was a sociological study of anorexia, published under the title Devenir anorexique, une approche sociologique. And more recently, her work has tended to focus more on elites, and particularly on elites in the educational system, including the classes préparatoires and grande école, and the debates around these elite institutions in French society and in academia, and debates about how elite education is changing in particular. So please join me in welcoming Muriel Darmon for this talk on State Nobility Revisited, Elite Education in France Today.
Well, thanks a lot to you, Shani, and to the Maison Française for this very kind invitation, and thanks to Lindsay also for her help, and also to Emmanuel Serda, who couldn't be here tonight, choose to be in France instead, but also made it possible. So the talk, as advertised, will be in English. I've done it before, but not that many times, so please forgive me in advance for any mistakes or unclarities. To keep track of time, I may have to read my notes, so sorry for the inconvenience. But I know it can happen when you read, so if it's really too boring, just stop me and I'll try to speak up and speak without a note. So I will begin quite traditionally with a lighter tone, and since we're in Colombia, let me do so by making a quick reference to a TV show that happens to take place here. In season 3 of Gossip Girl, one of the characters, the overachiever Blair, is all worked up because she has been invited to join a secret society called La Table Élitaire, that she describes like this. They're modeled after the Grandes Écoles in France, secret salons for the elite of academic institutions. Finally, something exclusive to strive for, something worthy of all my pent-up energy and attention. This is a very specific and maybe a very American vision of the French elite school system. A salon, almost like a dinner party, where you network in secrecy, where selectivity is a question of social capital, who you know, and not so much of cultural capital, work. If that sounds familiar, it may have more to do with the American Greek world of fraternities and sororities than with elite education in France. Elite education in France, even in French movies, is on the contrary, and French novels sometimes, is on the contrary usually seen as a much more stern and academic universe defined by the gravitas of an institution that has to build a state nobility. This phrase I just used is the title of a book published in 1989 by the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. Why build this talk about it, and around it, sorry, it's more like it. Because it's been a very influential book, historically speaking, but also because it is still a very useful book, due in part to the fact that since then, very few books or articles have been devoted to the French elite education system. There has been on the matter a big hole after state nobility, except for some historical studies and lots of statistics showing years after years basically the same thing, i.e. the enduring social selectivity of recruitment of elite schooling, to which we'll go back in a few minutes. But apart from that, not much, and for example, no qualitative or ethnographic study of the elite education institutions. On the other hand, there has been lots of studies in sociology or education in France on failing students, underprivileged students, dropouts, and almost nothing on good students, successful students, and elite education. So, until recently, state nobility has stood like a one-of-a-kind analysis. A one-of-a-kind, but with one small problem, the fact that the book was published, as I said, in 1989, based on data ranging from the 60s to the 80s. And so, clearly, even if its theoretical insight may well be still decisive, the question of its descriptive accuracy has been raised. Fortunately, but independently, elite education has recently gained a renewed interest in France, coming both from the media and politicians, and from scholars and sociologists. It has definitely become a hot topic in the last 5 to 10 years. What is funny is that you could basically make the same statement for the US, as witnessed by the cluster of studies and books recently published on elite recruitment and education, and culminating this year in the book Prevalent by Seamus Kahn. My own research, of which I will only speak a bit today, is part of this renewed interest, but with a specificity. Most, if not all, of my French colleagues have been working on the very recent and very political, if you want, experiments that have been added to the old school system of elite schooling in the last 10 years, and that I will present to you in the second part of my talk. On the contrary, I thought it was important to work on the same traditional and dominant elite education institutions that had been studied by Bourdieu in the 80s, and on which we still know so little, as I said. So, for 2.5 years, I observed the day-to-day life of several French preparatory classes. I will explain what it is to those who don't know in a few minutes. Made interviews with students and teachers, and attended classes, exams, evaluation sessions, and more informal moments. It is this research and the ones that are being made within the small circle of sociologists working on the subject in France today that I will use tonight to revisit the description and analysis of Bourdieu's state nobility, to examine what has stayed the same and what has changed for the last 20 years. First, maybe a few words of description of what constitutes elite education in France. I won't discuss, as I should, the term elite and its implications. Let me just say it has become the standard way of referring to the most selective and prestigious part of a country's higher education. Another language note, I'm going to use here the translation of the English version of La Noblesse d'État. So I will speak of preparatory classes or prep classes for the class préparatoire, which is so-so. I think that maybe prep schools would be more accurate. But, and I will speak of grandes écoles for grandes écoles, which is better, or maybe not, I don't know. As you probably know, if you've come to this conference, and maybe you don't, and it's very fine with me, the largest part of the French elite is not trained, as elsewhere, in universities, but at the grandes écoles, which are distinct institutions of higher education. To prepare for the competitive examinations allowing access to these écoles, most students follow 2 or 3 year courses at preparatory classes. Although they are more or less equivalent to undergraduate university studies, these preparatory classes are located in the lycée, in high school. So, and it's basically students from 18 to 20, as far as age is concerned. So, if I were to make broad and stretchy comparisons to begin with, I would say that grandes écoles, this is easy, are the French equivalent of elite universities in the US, and that prep classes, and this is much more difficult, are close to the last year of elite boarding school, plus with an idea of advanced placement maybe, or something anyway that seems to me quite more specific. Grandes écoles mainly fall into 2 categories, engineering school and business school. To this, we should add the 2 quite specific administrative and political schools that are Sciences Po and l'ENA, and the various Ecole Normale Supérieure, ENS, who train scholars and researchers in science and humanities, and even sociologists like Pierre Bourdieu, who attended the ENS. So, these are the schools. There are consequently different prep classes to prepare for each type of grandes écoles. Scientific prep classes, with a large focus on hard sciences, prepare students for the examination of engineering school and the ENS. Economic prep classes, with a focus on mathematics, history, economics, and a bit of philosophy and general knowledge, prepare for business school. And literary classes, with a focus on humanities mainly, prepare students only for the 3 ENS and more recently for some business school. So, to sum up, prep classes are the 2 or 3 years following high school and baccalaureate, when a small portion of the student population, it's around 5% of their age group, prepare for the concours, that is to say, the highly competitive examinations allowing access to the grandes écoles. These concours rank students anonymously according to a one-dimensional scale of merit. They are written, and if one succeeds in oral exams, but for example, there are no interviews. Former grades, either in high school or in prep classes, do not count in the concours. It's what you manage to prove anonymously on the D-Day that counts. The only criteria, therefore, are supposed to be academic ones. What are not criteria are character, personality, autobiographical essays, participation in extracurricular activities over the high school years, sports skills, the presence in the family of an alumni, and even better, a generous one. All these are supposed to have nothing to do, not only with the concours and the access to grandes écoles, but with the very idea of the academic, scholastic meritocracy, and if there were even more words to say that, I would put them, on which the system is based. So, on this, some things have changed, but we'll get to that later on. So, what is specific to French elite higher education is not so much the grandes écoles in themselves. I said it's quite close to elite universities. But the duality of the system is twofold nature. First, preparatory years, then school years. And on this I'll spend a few seconds. Prep classes are supposed to be, and are, to a large extent, a very ascetic time, all work and no play. Spent in a somewhat gloomy and even disciplinary institution, as I will show presently. On the contrary, life in grandes écoles can be sweet, much more hedonistic. The schedule is much less about work. There's a great article on the various roles played by Ecole in different schools, how you don't go out and drink the same way in engineering schools or business schools, for example, and what it says about those schools. So, it's largely academic asceticism on the one hand, the prep classes hand, school and campus life on the other. And one can argue that it is precisely this disjunction and succession of tension and letting off steam which constitute a salient specificity of the French system when compared, for example, to its American counterpart, where both can be more mixed and maybe in different proportions, but this is more for the discussion maybe. Let me then give you an idea of life in these institutions with an emphasis on prep school, which I feel are more specific and also happen to be my subject. So, state nobility emphasizes that asceticism and duress in prep classes are a way to manifest social superiority vis-à-vis those who are deemed not to be able to endure such a life. Bourdieu borrows a notion from Durkheim, that of negative rituals, rituels négatifs, i.e. rituals aimed at showing that one masters nature or his or her nature. What is indeed obvious to the researcher is that tension, asceticism, concentration on work is still a very strong and visible component of prep classes' life. As a consequence, it is self-evident for lots of French sociologists that these classes are a fine example of a total institution almost in the most totalitarian sense Irving Goffman had in mind when he coined the term. So let's examine quickly why or to what extent they're right. First, prep classes inmates are closely selected during admission procedures on both their grades and their attitudes towards school. They have to be straight-A students, very invested in schoolwork, but also very compliant students. And I gather this from the observation of admission procedures and committees that I made. At the beginning of the 2 years, I have observed various formal or informal ceremonies of admission, which are aimed at taking a hold on students and, to paraphrase Goffman again, at conditioning them into working, into devoting all their life for 2 years to the aesthetic world of knowledge. For example, there are numerous speeches uttered by the headmaster of the high school, which is also the headmaster of the preparatory classes, and this is very rare in France. I mean, it's not the case here, but in France the headmaster doesn't do many speeches. So, numerous speeches which are not so much pep talks as, so to speak, pressure talks. He basically tell the students to put every moment of their life at the service of the concours. He even tells them not to fall in love or not to fall into passion, because that would be detrimental to academic concentration. Also, the situation at the beginning of the prep classes is that of a social hiatus. Once again, a traditional component, I'm using the phrase from Goffman, so once again a traditional component of life in total institutions. Previous academic ranks and positions are no longer valid. Every student has to begin from scratch with new methods, new rules, new difficulties. The process is very close to the one identified in the elite boarding schools in America by James again, where the schools aims at showing that to students, although not in a demeaning way, that they must be taught from the beginning and that what came before, position of preparation, does not matter. Throughout the prep years, this institutional grip is maintained and even strengthened. In my research, I leave at this point Goffman and use the analysis that Foucault drew of disciplinary institutions and the way these institutions assert their power through three, I'm paraphrasing Foucault, three subtle but very efficient instruments: surveillance, sanction, and examination. For example, whereas total institutions exert their power by homogeneizing this is a hard one, you see what I mean, the human material they work on, prep schools do so by individualizing and even over-individualizing the evaluation and the definitions of every student's qualities and weaknesses. Let me just insist on one aspect that is fundamental to prep classes life: the importance of time and of the feeling of urgency that is imposed during these years. In this aesthetic lifestyle, time, the passing of it, the rhythm of it, the relationship to it, play a major role, as already suggested by Bourdieu's notion of urgency in State Nobility. He shows that urgency is a way to prepare students for power. Let me quote State Nobility on this. By turning a student's entire life into a competition placed under the sign of urgency, a race against the clock, preparatory classes, like sports in other traditions, create a simulated equivalent of the real struggles of ordinary life within the universe of school. Bourdieu goes on by saying that, without needing to explicitly state underlying principles, the institution thus inculcates deep-seated dispositions, and namely, the propensity and the capacity to make an intensive use of time. That will later give an advantage to those who display it in the struggles of professional life. This urgency is still very much a crucial aspect of prep classes life, woven in the fabric of everyday life. As I sat in classes, I observed the numerous ways in which professors, what they say, what they do, manage to constantly accelerate time and even fast forward, accelerate time and initiate this feeling of urgency. For example, when I asked one teacher if I could present my research to his students before sitting in class with them for a whole year, he said, do that on a day when I have them during 4 hours, because I can't lose these 5 minutes on a 2-hour session. And in the interviews with students, I found numerous signs of their incorporation of such a rhythm, the result of a specific temporal socialization, of having learned to feel time and time passing in a certain and urgent way. Time becomes also the measure of all things in prep classes, of individuals' abilities or difficulties, of hierarchies between students, fast students, quick students. What I also discovered was that the attitude that students manage to adopt towards urgency can be referred to their social position. The feeling of mastering time and still being able to breathe at high speed is much more present in students from upper classes families. This last remark brings us to another and fundamental feature of elite education in France today. It's enduring social selectivity. So, 1989, the year State Nobility was published, was by no coincidence the bicentennial of the French Revolution. Bourdieu's aim was to demonstrate that privilege and nobility still existed, albeit in a different form than during the Ancien Régime, and that the state, when it created grandes écoles, had created a new kind of nobility, justified both in its own eyes and in the view of those who didn't belong to it and were, nonetheless, ready to acknowledge its legitimacy. On this, State Nobility builds on two previous works by Bourdieu and Passeron, Reproduction and The Inheritors, which aim at proving that the dispositions defining scholarly excellence are in fact those detained by the upper classes. Unlike these two previous books, State Nobility is centered not on school in general, but on academic elites, concours général and agrégation, prep classes, and grandes écoles. It shows that the students from upper classes are overrepresented in these elite academic institutions, while the social basis of their academic excellence is never acknowledged as such by the academic institution. So, is this still true today? Between 1989 and today, the number of students in prep schools and grandes écoles has considerably grown, from 1.2 million in 1980 to 2.3 million in 2009. So there are more students, there are also more prep classes outside Paris. There has also been a boom in the number of economic prep classes. But in spite of all this, the ratio of students in these classes to their university counterparts, so first-year students, are surprisingly stayed exactly the same, around 7%. So it's still a very selective system, but is it more open, a less elitist one? I've already said it, it's not in the figures, no. These top 7%, if you will, come even more than before. Even more than they did in State Nobility's time, from the same place in the social space of social classes, as what you would say. That is, from upper classes family. And only 2 to 3% of working class children enter grandes écoles. Social segregation is at its best in the top grandes écoles. 1 in 1,000 of a generation gain entry to the top 4 grandes écoles, Polytechnique, HEC, ENA, ENS, and 80% of these students come from upper classes family. You can compare that to the university, where only a third of the students come from the same upper classes, and to the fact that these upper classes are like 15% of the French active population. So 15% of the French active population gives way to 80% of these top grandes écoles. And since the second half of the 20th century, things have only gotten worse. If we take, once again, the magnifying glass of the top 4 schools, in the 50s, 30% of the students were from working class background. In the 1990s, they were down to 9%. So, the thrust of State Nobility, and more generally of Bourdieu's work on school, social reproduction, and elitism, is, if I may say so, even more true today. A last very important point made by state nobility lies in the definition of a field of higher education and a field of grandes écoles. I won't enter any theoretical discussion of the Bourdieuian notion of field, but let me just say this. Prep schools and grandes écoles do not exist in a social vacuum. They do exist in relation to each other and to other institutions. They exist in a field of social forces that make each of them close or away, friend or foe, of others within the field. There are conflicts and struggles for power and legitimacy between the institutions within the field. Like all fields, the field of higher education is structured by opposition. Let's consider two of these briefly, two of these oppositions. First, and these are opposition described in state nobility. First, between a great door and a minor door to elite positions. What Bourdieu insists on, and what is still prevalent today, is the opposition between, on the one hand, prep classes and grandes écoles, attended by students of upper middle class and upper class families, and, on the other hand, the university, which has welcomed, together with middle class students, the new students of working class background since the massification of the 1970s. Inside the field of grandes écoles itself, a similar opposition does exist between the most prestigious schools, where the students come mostly from grande bourgeoisie, and will most probably end up there too, and the minor schools, not nationally well known and often located outside Paris, where both the students and their social destiny are, let's say, middle class one, to translate the petit bourgeois that Bourdieu is using. Another opposition distinguishes between schools that are close to economic or political power, such as l'ENA or HEC, where students come from families with even more money than they have diplomas, to schools that are closer to the academic, intellectual or artistic power, such as the ENS, with students who conversely come from families where diplomas are relatively higher than family incomes, typically children of teachers and professors. Such an opposition is also still valid as early as within the prep classes themselves. Students in literary prep classes for the ENS are much more often children of teachers and professors, whereas in classes preparing for business schools, they are coming relatively more from professional families. So, and this is still true. Is it okay so far? Am I understandable? Yeah. That's good. You would have said something, right? The structural perspective given by the notion of the field of higher education is a good starting point to inquire into what has changed since 1989. I thus entered the second part of my talk, and you will notice that I did something that I was not supposed to do, that is do a first part on what has then changed, and then second part on what has actually changed. And when I was at school, it was totally forbidden to use this kind of gross outline. So sorry for that. The two oppositions just mentioned, not the one I just mentioned there, but these two oppositions in the field still define the structure of the field of grandes écoles, of higher education. But some changes took place. The greatest one of them has been brought by internationalization, which I will now tackle. It was not mentioned in the 1989 edition of State Nobility, but Bourdieu began very soon to raise this question in interviews in the media about the book. And it is now a question extensively studied by some of his disciples and followers in internationalization. They suggest that a new capital, besides cultural, economic, and social capital, that are the three most well-known Bourdieuian capital, as a new capital has emerged and defines new dominant positions. It is called international capital. The field of higher education is now indeed an internationalized field, as witnessed by international policies for universities, international rankings, or the ever-present idea of a globalized market for higher education. This situation tends to legitimize a new kind of international cultural capital made of ability and taste for geographic mobility, a kind of upper-class way of dealing with national diversities, etc. In the field of higher education in France, such a promotion of international mobility was surprisingly, around the 1980s, a strategy used by second-rate grandes écoles. Small business schools, in their struggle with the great grandes écoles, promoted mobility and internationalization because they could not compete on academic grounds. Come and study here, we won't burden you with classes, and you will have lots of trips abroad. Today, on the contrary, it's not this mood any longer. An international program is part and parcel of the most prestigious and academically renowned schools. For example, very high requirements in foreign languages, study or internship abroad as vital part of the curricula, internationalization of faculty, cross-listed diplomas with foreign institutions, classes taught in English, sometimes in German, near the German border, etc. The students from Grandes Écoles also largely use the Erasmus program designed to bring internationalization to the universities. Still, more than 40% of students entering this program come from Grandes Écoles. This growing importance of international capital has definitely had an effect on the field of higher education. It has benefited mostly to the first participants in this internationalization, so once again, business schools. But what is interesting to note is the fact that it may have resulted in a reinforcement of academic requirements and orientation for these schools. To participate in this international field of higher education, business schools, for example, in France, must have in their faculty not so much people coming from the entrepreneurial, that's a hard one too, entrepreneurial world, but scholars, much more easy, able to have papers published in leading peer-reviewed international journals, that is, often American journals, as you know. I don't have time to develop this, but this trend of internationalization has had some real effects on day-to-day life of the students in prep schools. First, in the recruitment of prep classes and even in the concours of business grandes écoles, the French traditional exam with no personal disclosure of any kind, that was totally forbidden, has been supplemented with a much more biographical and personal evaluation. For example, speaking of business prep classes, so economic prep classes as we call them, for example, with an important interview called Entretien de personnalité, personality interview, which used to be not so long ago an exam in general knowledge and very academic and scholastic one. Also, students in these classes are now supposed to learn how to write and say what they think, which is, once again, very far from the genre of competitive exams in France. And if you look at student life also, I observed that in these economic classes, the real popular kids were always students who had spent lots of time outside France, and especially students who had spent part of their academic career in the United States. That was really the top of it. La crème de la crème. And even more deeply, they were precisely described, as I did, as popular, which is a new way of framing the social juvenile hierarchies in France, and a new way to challenge the monopoly of academic criteria in these hierarchies in prep classes. Populaire used to be only used by sociologists referring to working class, and now it means something altogether different and in the American sense of the term. This Americanization is not a problem in itself. I'm all for Americanization, but this trend clearly benefits some students and some families more than others, and it's far from being a way to end reproduction of the elite, as you may well understand. It's all the more the case when such a transformation in the field of grandes écoles may both echo and strengthen the transformation occurring at large within the French upper classes and their capitals. In Bourdieu theory, economic and cultural capitals are what define position of power, the most powerful situations aggregating both types of capitals, economic and cultural. But Bourdieu and his team showed clearly that in order to succeed at school, it was better to be relatively well endowed with a cultural capital, whereas economic capital was relatively not so useful. But the hypothesis has recently been made of a growing importance of economic capital relatively to cultural capital in that matter. To quote from one scholar, in France, the intellectual fractions of the middle classes have traditionally been advantaged by the formal and strongly scholastic meritocratic procedures of access to the state grandes écoles. They are, however, challenged today because families with higher incomes are able successfully to transform economic capital into cultural capital through residential and school choice, private tuition and private preparations for tests and competitive examination. And I would add that, last but not least, the new international capital may well be a very expensive one to acquire, but by long trips abroad, for example. If this is correct, this would be a really important change in the field of higher education in France. This field has never been a totally meritocratic one, but at least it was not solely and not even primarily dominated by money. And if working class children statistically never had the chances, at least children of kindergarten teachers had more chances to succeed in it than children of affluent but not highly educated businessmen. So time will tell if this is going to change, and that would be something that would be a really important change. This problem, and more generally social reproduction, has not been ignored by grandes écoles and the media, although it has not been cast in the sociological terms I just used. The second important change since state nobility lies indeed in a new preoccupation and a new set of practices pervading prep classes and grandes écoles. I am referring to the debate about diversity in elite education, ouverture sociale. Under this name, programs or experiments have been launched in order to shake the elite reproduction system and to broaden access to elite education for underrepresented groups. The debate has been framed both in terms of social justice and in terms of social efficiency and even economic productivity. Part of it comes from business managers asking for a renewal of elite. But we will see that it has also been, for the schools involved, the right and clever thing to do in a specific political context and a specific state of the field of grandes écoles. The first of these programs is the one launched by Sciences Po, a top administrative and business school, in 2000. It created a special admission track for the students of 7 high schools located in economically disadvantaged areas, ZEP, with a view to diversifying and democratizing the school's admission process. I'm quoting here a very useful text by Daniel Sabag, which has the advantage of being available in English in the journal French Politics, Culture and Society. Instead of having to take the competitive exam imposed on all other applicants, those students were asked to write papers and defend them in front of a jury made up of teachers and administrators of their high school. Then, the best candidates were invited for an interview at Sciences Po itself. Those who received an admission offer at the end of the day were also provided with financial aid, as well as with a specific kind of tutoring. 2 other kinds of programs were launched since. The top business school, the ESSEC, established in 2002 the Grande Ecole, Why Not Me experiment, based on individual tutoring and work sessions organized by students from the Ecole and proposed to straight A's underprivileged students from working class neighborhoods. And finally, a top high school, well known for its prep classes, the Lycée Henri IV, created in 2006 the first prep school to prep schools, classe préparatoire aux études supérieures, That is to say, an extra year of high school designed to prepare straight-A's underprivileged students, once again, to prep school, with a focus on teaching them methods, cultural ease, and implicit knowledge that are natural to upper classes students. The architect of this project has read and taught Bourdieu for years, so he knows what it's up to. Following these initiatives, other programs have been created since. From 2005 onwards, the state itself has become an actor in the process through various legal texts, Charte pour l'égalité des chances, loi d'orientation circulaire, and also various presidential addresses. First President Chirac in 2006, then President Sarkozy in 2007, called for the incorporation of 30% of boursiers, that is students on financial aid whose families are below a certain income, in prep classes. What is the import of these programs? First, the jury is still out on the actual benefit for the students that have gone through them. It's quite early. And it has often been said, nonetheless, that although these programs can be effective in limiting processes of self-exclusion due to institutional, cultural, economic factors, their impact seems limited. Studies on students who entered through such channels show indeed the enduring effect of previous social origins. Prep classes and grandes écoles, if you will, are not a scholastic melting pot, selective but where all differences disappear once the student body is constituted. The value of one's diploma, even that elite diploma, rests heavily on one's previous social resources and capitals. Moreover, the debate is still raging on the adequacy of such individual solutions to a collective and structural problem. For example, the leading piece by Bourdieu in a recent special issue of Bourdieu's journal, Actes de la recherche en sciences sociales, devoted to these experiments, is called New Programs, So What? It insists on the fact that universities, where the majority of working class students complete or not their higher education, does not benefit far from it from the same amount of money, efforts, and political attention these very limited programs get. Nevertheless, such a social preoccupation is shaping the debate, but also shaping the field of grande école. The sociologist Agnès van Zonten has shown that with that kind of preoccupation, prep classes and grandes écoles have achieved a double goal. First, they have managed to relegitimate their function, which was tainted by a social elitist or reproduction stigma. But they also have managed to be recognized as actors in the political field. For example, Sciences Po has really managed to set the agenda and even the political agenda on this, and has clearly benefited from it. Richard Descoings, its president, was considered following all this for a cabinet position as Secretary of Education. More generally, the relative position of schools like Sciences Po and DSEC in the field of grandes écoles has certainly been changed for the better thanks to their social efforts. I stop here on this question, but if you want to know more and read French, I will highly recommend a special issue that the sociology journal I'm an editor of, Société Contemporaine, has devoted to this question of diversity through a Franco-American comparison. And it compares with these experiments with percentage plans and well, you'll see. Is 5 minutes okay? 5 more minutes? Is 10 more minutes okay? Well, try to. Another kind of people entering grandes écoles have been much more discreet and have aroused much less attention, young women. Monique de Saint-Martin, who worked with Bourdieu on state nobility, but was not explicitly credited as a co-writer of the book and the cover, has recently revisited state nobility herself by saying that one very important feature of the field of grandes écoles, gender, had been overlooked completely in this book. I do concur, and in an article that I've written on admission procedures in prep classes and the body on their gender bias, I note that one very important analysis by Bourdieu and Saint-Martin is a beautiful analysis of the debatable one. So when it's very important analysis on categories of perception, catégorie de l'entendement professoral, is about judgments on a female class made by a male professor, but that's this dimension is not even mentioned in the book. But if we look today at prep schools and grandes écoles, gender can no longer be overlooked. The most obvious transformation that took place during the last 50 years is the increase in the number of women. It was not as early and as high an increase as in the university. But as far as prep classes and grandes écoles are concerned, women came a long way. Prep classes and grandes écoles were a boys' school and in the literal sense, which they are no longer. There was already 31% of women in 1975, and there are now 43%, close to 50, that is, even if it's not 50. But gender inequalities are nonetheless still prevalent. There are many more women in literary prep classes, while hard science prep classes and engineering grandes écoles are still very masculine ones. But good news, business prep classes are almost 50-50%. Although there has been an attempt, even political ones, to drive girls and young women to science, things may be very slow to change when you hear, as I did during my ethnography of scientific prep classes, what math professors have to say about a woman's brain and logical abilities, and you don't want to know what they have to say. Similarly, during the ritualized collective review of students by teachers at the end of each term, conseil de classe, that I observed, categories of descriptions of excellent female students were systematically, in these scientific prep classes, were systematically on the serious and hard-working side. One side even heard she's got a beautiful handwriting. Whereas excellent male students were granted inventivity or vision as far as scientific abilities were concerned. I have described important changes in the field of French higher education, its student body, and the debates about its social function. Have these changes reshaped the institution itself? Moving to my conclusion. Regarding prep classes, of which I said that they could, under many criteria, be seen as total institution, there had been a general and structural delegitimization of this total, or rather totalitarian character. Both state policies and teachers' discourses, for example, have tended to display a new kind of institution, no more oppressive, no longer gloomy. So, word on the academic street is that the whole system has softened, has been modified. Word is, it's not what it used to be, and it's a good thing. Is it true? Not that it's a good thing, but that it's not what it used to be. Well, clearly, practices have changed. The prep classes used to be regulated by a sort of like it or live it policy, and dropouts in the first few weeks were the rule. Those who clung to it with their teeth would stay. But it is no longer the norm. Teachers are supposed to begin slowly the first year. They're supposed to keep their students and to bring them to the competitive examination at the end of the 2-year period. They are constantly being reminded by their superior or in the media of the higher cost supported by the state for their students compared with university students. And teachers feel that they are under review and much more that they are much more accountable than they used to be. In a word, they're supposed, and they feel compelled, to curb the potential symbolic violence of the institution, which they do in more ways than one, while they are still using, on the other hand, the arsenal of control provided by the total institution, because they had to make the students work. This explains why I have in my field notes so many oxymorons used by professors to speak of their work in interviews and in formal observation. These oxymorons aggregate the traditional total and the new human character of the institution. I'll give you a few examples. I use sometimes, and it was not easy, I don't know if it's going to be very clear, but I use sometimes the iron fist and sometimes the velvet glove. When I give an F, it's very nicely. Prep school is a prison, but a 4-star one. You play with a carrot, and then you play with a stick. But the thing is, it doesn't mean the institution is no longer powerful or has lost its hold on students. It's just a different kind of grip. It asserts its power through a more compassionate, but also much more intrusive and extensive domination. For example, it helps students with their way of life, their health. It advises them to do some sport, to let off steam, to sleep a certain number of hours, to go to the movies, not to fall into passion as we saw, but to enjoy each other's company. It evaluates not only their work, but their state of mind, their psychology, even during conseil de classe. And, it evaluates their emotions. A more compassionate institution is also a much more intrusive institution, which can extend its power on students to the maximum. This is why, more than a total or disciplinary institution, I call it, paraphrasing Durkheim, an enveloping institution, institution enveloppante, maybe a blanketing institution would be translation of that. Powerful but not oppressive, and powerful because it's not oppressive. To end this conclusion very briefly, I would say that any revisitation of state nobility today should pose on the title itself and on the expression coined by Bourdieu. A state nobility is it still? A state nobility is it still? This title sounds self-evident for a French year of, let's say, my generation and before, but this evidence may begin to fade as the importance of the French state in the field of higher education may decline. Of course, it is the state who created or restructured the most prestigious grandes écoles after the French Revolution, and prep classes and grandes écoles were at first designed to serve state needs and are still in their majority public national institutions, state funded, everything. But the rise of business schools, which are for the most part private, the dynamic, or private and public, it's a bit complicated, but the rise of business schools, the dynamic of the field itself, which seems in a way more loosely connected with state guidelines than before, as we saw with the social experiments, where the state came after the schools, if you remember well. And especially the pressure of the so-called international market for education may well be the sign of the decline of the state principle of legitimization of this nobility. So the question has been asked by many sociologists in the last 1 or 2 years, what becomes of state nobility when symbolic capital is granted elsewhere by other institutions or by other states. And with this, I will end here, and thank you for your good timing, perfect timing. So I'm open to
Just a question. It's about, can we know which prep school you studied exactly?
No, you cannot know exactly.
Is it?
I will give you as many information as you need to get a picture. The thing is, I choose not to go to the most selective and prestigious prep school. But I chose also not to study prep schools where entering grandes écoles is only the case for very few students. So it's a good de province, so a good outside Paris prep school.
You talked about the working class, the middle class, and the upper class, and I understand that those classes have different access to the cultural capital. But I'd like to understand how do you define those classes in France?
Sure. This is, I think that the best answer here would be statistical. So just to give you an idea, For working class, this is like I'm not sure. Yeah, the children of workers and also employés, which are low-skilled jobs, and this amounts to let's say 50, a bit more, between 50 and 55% of the active population. So when I say upper class, it's more like upper class and upper middle classes, and that would be like for French, in French, cadre and profession intellectuelle supérieure, and this is like 16% of the active population. So middle classes would be like in between. So if we do the math. Yes?
One of the changes you mentioned was the internationalization of the Grandes Écoles. But in your examples, you talked mostly about internationalizing those students either in their preparation or in their studies. One of the big advantages that I think many universities have, and that is especially true for the big universities in the United States, is internationalization in another sense. That is, people from other countries studying in these institutions and confronting their ideas and cultures with those of American students. To what extent is that the case in the Grandes Écoles? And I suppose there's a difference between the private and the public, but can you give us some idea of the percentages of foreign students in the different Grandes Écoles?
Sure. If you want the exact percentage, I can look it up, because I'm not sure I know it by heart.
Exact is not.
But yeah, it's true. It has been part of the internationalization, and well, I'll check it after maybe.
Fine.
But it has been said that. Well, okay, I give you the.
Has that been done in Sciences Po,
Sciences Po,
and Polytechnique as well?
Yeah. I've got the numbers for Sciences Po just here, and a big blank about what it is, but I'm sure I've got the number for Sciences Po. And I think I could find, but not here, not on the spot, for the UNS. And Polytechnique, I'm not so sure about that. It was largely advertised for Sciences Po and for business schools. I mean, if you look at business school websites, they advertise largely the percentage of foreign students.
L'ENA must be a bit different because it's really forming public servants for the French government, isn't it?
Yes, it does. Although European students can, under some rule, and can attend classes and be granted position at the end of it. And the difference, l'ENA is also different because you've got ENA schools outside of France, I mean abroad. You've got the schools that are, so it's, and they have also, it's a kind of a model they're promoting on an international basis. Yes? One or the other? Answer both, I swear.
I'm a graduate student in the history department. I studied elite schools in the late 19th century, not in France, in Germany, Britain, and Russia primarily. Okay. So I'm here basically just to get as much information about the system as I can. I really don't know much at all about it. But I find it very interesting that the French have made such an effort to create what is, to create this meritocracy. For example, in Britain, the idea of character, which was almost a code word for certain aristocratic traits, was very much a part of the admissions, process.
In the United States also, there's been like books on this, on what this character meant over the years.
Right, and I can't help but to think that these recent efforts at trying to diversify the student bodies is also somewhat going against the idea of a meritocracy. And I wondered if you thought that 30% of the student body perhaps being not as qualified as other other portions of the population, if that's a detriment to the nation in the long run, or if it's actually if it'll actually have a beneficial effect.
Well, there has been lots of debates on this in France, on the fact that does it mean, is it the meritocratic thing to do or the unmeritocratic thing to do? With very different positions on this. The thing is, if you look, for example, at Sciences Po, one of these schools, you have there was a monitoring of the monitoring of the students to see if they were doing equally well than the other students entered by other. But this is, and the result was that, basically they were, they had some weaknesses, but they were doing equally well. The thing is, in school, in the schools in France are not as highly and has difficult a system as prep classes. So basically, everybody goes from one year to the other. So this, when this question was asked in this very flat form, it couldn't be answered because they were doing equally well. But the question is, well. But anyway, I want to answer on what I think of this. I think that on the do I think it's detrimental? I think these are good experiments and good thing to do just to try to shake things up. But I do on here. I think that maybe it's a way also of evading the problem, which is much more structural and much more collective. So I would be on this. I would be more Bourdieusian than I usually am. I think and say that. In a way, answering this question is less important than seeing the kind of the tree hiding the forest.
I am somewhat surprised. Just to follow up real quick, I'm somewhat surprised that you say that the students are doing, pleasantly surprised. If the statistics show that the students are doing as well. I mean, I attended the United States Military Academy. We had certain affirmative action policies or quota policies in place in order to create, because we have a totally different mission, to create a diverse officer corps that represents the enlisted soldiers of the Army. And we succeeded that, but the students from certain minority groups clearly don't perform as well. And so it's contrasting that with
you don't read French, so if I'm selling to you again my beautiful journal that everybody's that won't good answers to your question would be there. The thing is and especially on the American system also. But, yes, Louis.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you thought that the current changes in the high school French system were going to have an effect on the type of students that will go to Prépa in the next few years, or even on the system itself.
You mean what I briefly mentioned for the economic prep classes, for example?
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think that the fact that the requisites. It's Latin, so I guess it's okay. Change, for example, in the economic classes, it's not the same straight A student, the same idea of the bookworm student that they're trying to recruit. And this is going to change something, I think. Because you've got, and I have many cases of students that were academically brilliant, but were not deemed like to be, for example, were not involved in associations or were not involved in extracurricular activities, which used to be a thing that was not even talked about or even existed in the universe of French prep classes. And all the things, extracurricular activities, parties, for example, the higher the food chain is the students that do well academically, but also goes to the parties that are almost institutionalized in the economic prep classes. And you've got to manage to dance until 4 in the morning and then to succeed in your math exam the next morning. So the same morning, if you will. And of course, all this, and this has changed things at the level of juvenile hierarchies, but also, I think, in the kind of students that these classes are preparing and that the schools are going to recruit. And actually, the thing is, these economic prep classes are the ones that have mushroomed the more in France over the last 10 to 20 years, and also are now the most selective prep schools. So if you look at the social origins of different of students in different prep classes, the top is one type of these economic prep classes. So it's like 65%, I think, in these classes of students of upper classes families, and it's the highest. Or it's a follow-up.
Regarding the question that was previously asked on whether students from different social class accepted in Ecole do perform the same. In fact, I'm not very surprised that you say they do, because it's true that I think at Ecole the requirements are not as high as in the prep class. But I think what would be interesting is to see, and I don't know if you know their stats on whether the employment rates are the same.
The thing is, employment rates and types of jobs that they get after still are, there has been statistical studies that have shown that it's better than if they wouldn't have gone through this, but it's still not as good as the ones that are from higher social origins and that went through Grandes Écoles. So it's a kind of mixed blessing, if you but this begins to.
Don't you think like the whole principle of Grandes Écoles is kind of, I want to say empty, but like we only consider this as being the Grandes Écoles because only the best students go, but not because these schools provide the best education. I know my brother went to Lyon, for example, and he told me that the classes were very boring and he didn't feel like he was actually learning something, but he probably will have a good job and a good salary just because he had this diploma.
Yeah, well, this is, in a way, the thing is, it's this duality of the system, because what schools like the ESSEC, or, for example, it has been beautifully shown for HEC, what they do is to, so it's going to be a very hard one, descholasticizing. I don't even remember what it is in French. Well, they take students and they transform them from their very bookworm attitude to future businessmen. So they have to break they feel that they have to break every tendency to consider things as in an academic way. They try to so really they try to turn like intellectual from prep classes into something different. And so I was referring to an article in Revue Française de Sociologie on that. So in a way, then they don't aim at being intellectually satisfying. It's not what they do. And it's very different from other kind of school. But this one's very different. Yes?
In American universities, and Columbia conspicuous among them, teachers are forced to do research, and researchers are forced to teach. And there was a cartoon some years ago outside of the Columbia placement office showing Christ on the cross, and the caption read, "He did not publish," which I thought was very apt. Now, I thought the French had perhaps do it differently. The CNRS gives the researcher a chance to concentrate on research, and if he has no teaching ability, it makes no difference. And at least in the past, what was it, the Doctorat d'État, you could spend 30 years producing the magnus opus, whereas here, it's what have you done for us lately? And of course, research is ground out by the reams in totally unpublishable editions and published in journals that nobody reads.
Well, I don't want to, to sadden you about the French situation, but yes, there is a CNRS, but it's a very small part of the academia, and I'm happy to be part of it. But it's like 3 to 6 positions, within a specific discipline. But so, and the thing is, now there's in French you say publish or perish. So publish or perish has become like a.
They even use the English phrase.
Yeah.
I
know. But we still, and it's we feel that every day. So, and the thing is, it's that plus the fact that we have to do it in English, which is not our language, and we've got to write articles in English and to have them accepted, not only by our journal in French, which is okay, but by international, that is to say American, British is okay too, but American journals. So, when you're doing statistical mathematics, English is not a problem. When you're doing, for example, sociology and ethnography, and you've got to translate social connotations, it's not that funny.
There was a time, I think, Jean-Paul Sartre, didn't he teach at the Lycée Louis le Grand?
Yeah, I think he was a philosophy teacher at some point. Yeah. And in class, we had lots of philosophers, highly renowned and true intellectual philosophers were teachers in class préparatoire, and it was a very legitimate position. This is not the case, but also because now intellectual in France tend to be more and more defined by Sciences Po and Saint-Guillaume, compared and not so much at the École Supérieure, for example. So it's a very different kind of intellectual that is now cooking in France.
I worked in France for a number of years, and something that amazed me, even though I was familiar with the country before, was the shared admiration for intellectualism. And in fact, I had never known that there was a profession of being intellectuel until I was in France, and some people were presented that way to the public. But I also found that working in industry or in commerce, that the people who were graduates of the Grandes Écoles, who were automatically piloted or parachuted into the top levels of those companies, tended to be to demonstrate something that you talked about earlier, the fact that they were intellectual bêtes. I mean, they were animals. They'd endured the class prépa and they'd come out on top, but they were also fairly socially inept, and that most of these people were polytechniques, so their idea of running an enterprise was more military than anything else. But it led, I thought, to an almost impenetrable wall between these people who were admirable and for their intellectual capacity, and the people that they were trying to lead, who certainly didn't share that and didn't believe they shared it. And that was another thing that amazed me was that the graduates themselves had a certain arrogance that I could understand, having gone through what they had. But but the other French people didn't seem to mind that. They seemed to share the admiration to the same extent that the graduates had arrogance, because the whole country had this admiration for the intellectual capacity. And I found that admirable in a way, but I didn't find it the most efficient way of doing business, I guess.
Well, maybe you would be more pleased today, because this may have changed. And the thing is, that's what I said on the relationship between economic and cultural capital. Maybe something really deep is changing here in the distribution, but also in the legitimacy and the differential legitimacy of these capitals. And so this, this, for example, if you take President Sarkozy, is the first one of the right-wing presidents of the Fifth Republic not to come from Grandes Écoles. And also maybe you've been, you know that it's done some, let's say, cultural capital bashing over the years. And this is quite new, and this quite systematic also can be said, well, this may be the same trend of different powers or legitimacy attributed to these different kind of capital. And Sarkozy is clearly the president of economic capital against cultural capital. And so it epitomizes, in a way, the struggle that these capitals, that the idea that Bourdieu has, that there is a struggle for a specific kind of capital that you're interested in promoting because it's yours, and against the other kinds of capitals. Yes, you've already asked a question.
I have a question actually on the programs that you described that were targeting like the people from the middle class against economic capital. I'm French, I've been to class préparatoire, essai, and Sciences Po, so I know that the program that you described, like essai, or like the program there at Sciences Po, and I was wondering, as you described also, that on the other end, money was being more and more, like, was having a bigger role now, and like economic capital was buying social capital. And on the other hand, they are developing this kind of program. Like, how do you see the future on this topic? Like, how the program be able to reverse this trend of economic capital by this product? And do you think they will really have an impact in those institutions? Because as far as I see it, like, it's good that ESSEC is having that. It's good that Sciences Po is having this program, but I think the reality doesn't change too much.
That would be what I think as far as the specific target, i.e. underprivileged students, is concerned. I think that it has effects, but more on the field of Grandes Écoles, on the public debate, maybe on a political level, all these effects. But it's true that I'm quite, once again, I'm not so sure this is a solution, but well, saying that, you can say that when you see that years after years, the statistics are the same, social reproduction is the same, I think that it's only natural to want to experiment new things, to try to shake things up a bit. But the thing is, well, and it can have, the thing is, everything is it's very complicated because it could have a positive impact on self-confidence for students, even if it's one student, but then in his group of friends, they know that they could, if they worked and go to this or that Grande Ecole and stuff like that. But studies, ethnographic studies of the students in, for example, in the prep classes to prep classes, show that it can also have very detrimental effects on, let's say, motivations, and because those who don't succeed, even in these systems, so they think that it was targeted for them and they did not succeed. It's even more violent than through the usual system. And the thing is also, it's there are lots of idea of betrayal of one's class, of one's family, and is using this kind of system, is it a way to become some categories are vrai zep, faux zep, and so there are quite a lot of research actually show that the effects, even on, let's say, psychology, motivation, well-being, are not, are clearly at best ambivalent. So. Anyone?
I just wanted to know your position on the argument of which is made by both representatives of the universities or Ecole and representatives of the Federation of Ecole, which basically say you are saying a lot of bad things about Ecole and only about Ecole, but the problem is a lot more larger and it's a lot more about the whole system of education, and it's not only the end of it, it's like high school, college, also.
Sure. The thing is, the prep classes are not responsible for social reproduction, because when they, I've witnessed many admission committee, but they take the best students. Really, they don't look for bourgeois quartier de noblesse, and they just take the best students with the more suitable, sorry, thanks, attitudes. And this amounts to 80% of, so the thing is, the problem is clearly elsewhere. It's built throughout the whole school system, from Ecole maternelle, because one of my first research actually was on the first year of Ecole maternelle, kindergarten. And well, the thing is, there were already a difference coming from the social origins of these 3 years kids. So, and it's, of course, it's a cumulative process. So at 18 and within the process of entering class préparatoire, everything is already built up before. So it's true that it's not the responsibility of the prep classes or Grande Ecole. But it's also true that this is, of course, an argument trying to say that they're not responsible for it, and it's in the fight, but it's very true. I mean, nobody enters class préparatoire, Grande Ecole, by sleeping and going to parties, and you know, it's hard work anyway. So it is the best students. Yes.
In this country, any graduate from an American high school, but the only thing that keeps him out of a college or university, I think, would be organic brain damage. And I'm not altogether sure about that. How many baccalaureate in France, do you have approximately what percentage of holders of the bachelor in France do wind up at the university? You know, just a vague idea.
The baccalaureates. I know that what they're trying to do is have 80% of students take the baccalaureate.
Succeed.
Succeed, yeah, pass the baccalaureate. Yeah. And then, which percentage? Yeah, I may have this. I didn't know it was going to be a joke tonight. So I've got this figure also in my dossier, you know, but I can look it up and give it to you. It's, well, no, I wouldn't guess, I said.
It wouldn't be 90%, I'm sure.
90%?
90.
Yeah.
20.
Yeah, something like that, between 10 and 20, I would say. But
No, wait. 10 or 20 succeed, or 10 or 20 do not?
oh, sorry, you mean succeed in the university?
Of
No.
students who get the
No.
baccalaureate, how many go on to either university or go Ecole?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. I would say, well, 5%. Oh, yes. Because 5% go to class préparatoire, prep classes. But these 5% are 5% of a generation, of a cohort. And in this 5%, you've got many who don't go, many. You've got some who don't go until the baccalaureate. Yeah, no, I think that I've got somewhere the percentage of French young high school baccalaureate students who go to universities. If that's what you're asking, I will look it up. But it's much more than prep classes, of course. But it's not, I would say 10 to 20. No. I'll check. I'm very bad with guessing figures.
Yeah, question is, what are the sources of the cultural capital today in France, or what are the factors that are determining that the employment rates are that you mentioned? I mean, a few minutes ago are different between different groups, right?
Sources of cultural. I'm not sure I understand.
What are the sources of cultural capital? I mean, surnames or specific social origins, or
yeah, it's specific social origin, and more specifically the diplomas that parents have achieved. So this is cultural capital. The proxy for cultural capital is the parents' diploma in Bourdieu's theory.
yeah, I understand. Maybe I understand what can be a proxy, but finally, when the employers are selecting people, they are not seeing a proxy, right? They are interviewing people, and they are. You said that there are different employment rates between people that are going to the same school, right? So, what are those employers seeing? The surname of the people, or?
Oh, they're looking at the diplomas of the people once again, and so they're looking at if you come from a grande école. So this is the road to employment, high-skilled employment jobs.
I think he's mentioning about the different employment rates we were mentioning between different social classes, even through the same grande école, from different social classes. So it would be, I guess, like surnames, address.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry, I'm beginning to get late for me. I'm still jet lagged. Well, yeah, there are lots of studies, ethnographic studies, on the recruitment by in the job recruitment in the job market. The fact that your attitude, the way you speak, and your network also, because it's not only cultural capital, it's also what you would call social capital. That is who you know, and all this is embodied in your very persona, the way you present yourself to others, and so is chosen or not chosen by a prospective employer. So,
I think Muriel's getting tired.
no, I can. Yeah, I can take one or two more.
Okay.
if you fight for it. Yeah, you've been asking for a long time.
I was interested in what kind of results this study, the specific study, brings to you more general work on socialization, and what if I know it's like, but if you can say a little word about what brought you into this study, and what did you find that you didn't find with the previous work?
Yeah, it's not a small question. But yeah, well, as Shani mentioned, what interested me in this was to study how an institution transforms or not persons, and even a very powerful institution at this one, what effect does it have on people that are going through it? So I've got a case study, if you will, as far as my own work is concerned, a case study of how this kind of enveloping institution and to what extent this kind of specific institution transforms students. So this is more later, if you will. I could speak for hours, but. And did you have a question on what I do and what was not in Bourdieu's State Nobility? Or no?
Yes.
What Bourdieu brings to the...
Okay. In comparison with your previous works, I was intrigued by the fact that you studied the anorexia careers, teenagers' careers, and now the collective groups, like teenagers' groups career, like how the cohort is going to come forward and
yeah, well, actually it may seem as very different subject, but it's also quite kind of close, because I used to say that I was interested in youth asceticism in a way, and even if it's not the same, and in anorexia, the whole asceticism is like an individual and not induced by an institution, compared with the very ascetic institution, ascetic making, ascetic forcing institution that is class préparatoire. But in a way, in both cases, I'm looking at a very specific kind of use that has or is ascetic, has to be or is ascetic.
Are you saying you find a higher incidence, or you think you will find a higher incidence of anorexia among class préparatoire?
Yeah, but not today. Part of my work on anorexia was on the fact that it was anorexic girls came from upper middle classes and upper classes, and it's striking in a way, because the same percentage, 60, let's say, a bit more than 60% of anorexic girls come from upper middle classes and upper classes family, and so
which are usually the ones who send their children to
the same percentage. So that's why, in a way, you will find more, but also because this ascetic dispositions in the anorexic case can easily meet the ascetic institution that are class préparatoire, meaning a kind of connection that can happen here.
Do boys get anorexic, or do they just get arrogant? I don't know what the when they go through the class préparatoire. No, forget it.
One of the other. Well, it's not exclusive, you know. It's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
But there's an article on anorexia written in English, because I'm publishing in English, in the journal, the British journal called Sociology, which is called The Fifth Element, if you want to have a look. And it's in English. And I've written myself.